So I've been away for quite a while. I haven't made a video. I've been pretty busy with work and whatnot, but I'm gonna try to start making videos again pretty regularly. I've still been debating quite a bit on YouTube in the comments section and everything because that's just easier, um, a lot less time consuming when it comes to videos, and I'm kind of helter skelter, I guess. I get on one thing and I get on another thing, but I'm gonna try to do better. I'm gonna try to make more videos because in the end, that is a lot more satisfactory, I think. Something I want to talk about here is a big reason for my absence is it's very frustrating sometimes trying to deal with a lot of people trying to debate ideas when it seems fairly obvious to me that most people their their understanding of philosophy and logic is just it's almost non-existent. Like the such basic fucking principles that you learn about in a philosophy or a logics course are just like over people's fucking heads. And by the time you get into a debate with someone, and if they don't have those tools, they don't have that understanding. I mean, it's like you can't even debate them. It's like you can't. It's like they can't even be convinced if and when they're wrong because they don't have the understanding to understand when they've been beaten. And the only thing I can compare it to, it's like you're trying to play someone at a sport, and your opponent has no idea what game you're even playing. They can't look up at the scoreboard. They have no idea about the rules. I mean, and if you kick the shit out of them, you know, at this sport, and if they're stubborn enough, they'll just insist over and over and over again that they know the game better than you do. And if you say something that they don't understand, they'll accuse you of rigging the game like as it goes on. You know, to where whatever the results of the play were, they'll accuse you of just making the game up on the spot to reflect, your bias. When actually that's what they're fucking they're the one who has no understanding of the game. So I feel like I need to make a video kind of just addressing very, very basic concepts. Like the biggest problem I find is that people do not know what logic is. I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't really know what it was. I mean, I think I kind of had a general understanding. I think most people they kind of get what the word means, but so many people use it so casually that it really, really hinders their ability when they get into a debate with someone and someone brings up the topic of, well, they say, well, that's not logical. The other person doesn't even know what that means. They don't even know how to evaluate whether something is logical or not. They often conflate it with the idea of sensibility. I see that a lot. Like someone will say something is logical. And I'll be like, no, the ideas that you just presented are not logical. They're very contradictory. Um, Now, I get that they are emotionally or sensibly satisfying. Like if you just looked at them at the surface, I get that they feel right. But if you actually look at them and you actually evaluate the ideas and how they contradict each other, no, that they are not logical. But if you get to a point with someone, to that point, they're not going to be open to whatever definition you offer to them. Um, okay, so logic is logic is not subjective; it's objective. That's why so many. That's why philosophers use it. It's the immovable fucking rock. It's the one thing that you can't just use sophistry to get around. You can't just be like, well, it's my opinion, and then move on. No, logic is a cold-hearted bitch. The only way to try and put it in terms for someone who doesn't understand what logic is basically math. Okay, it's like the concept of math, just we apply it to word form. Okay, so in the same way that we can say x equals 7, that's kind of a meaningless statement in and of itself. If you want to evaluate if x actually equals 7, you need to tell me more about x. You know, You need to give me more criteria than just telling me x equals 7. And a lot of times when people want to talk about animal rights or whatever, they'll give you statements that are as worthless as x equals 7, and they won't give you anything else. They'll say like, they'll say eating meat is moral. And I'm just sitting there going, and what? How did you arrive at that conclusion? You have to give me more so I can evaluate the logic of it. If I were to give you, so if I were to say like x equals 7 and then minus 4 divided by 80, then you're starting to get somewhere. I'm starting to put myself in a hole. I'm starting to make x more discernible. You're able to evaluate it better. The more that I describe the equation, the more likely you're going to be able to point out where I could be going wrong. And that's what most, I would say most sophist debaters try to do. They try to make it they say as little as they possibly can because they don't want to put themselves in a hole. I mean, it's the whole idea behind, lawyers always tell their defendants, when you get on the stand, say as little as possible, because if you say something, another lawyer out there, someone who really knows what they're doing, they're going to be able to grab one thing that you said, and then that can tear everything else you said down. So to kind of display how logic is an immovable object, and I've used this quite a few times with just the most stubborn people. This is what I bring out. Maybe I should bring it out before I even start a conversation with most people. But okay, you can evaluate logic even when you're just talking about opinions. Okay, you don't even necessarily have to have facts. That's not what logic is concerned with. If you could tell 3 lies and have them all be logical with one another, that's not necessarily. So I mean, saying something is logical doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. It's just pointing out that, okay, you've established something that at least is consistent with the other claims that you've made. But let's say you know nothing about colors, for example. Nothing. You only know that colors exist. That's it. And I were to say to you, green is prettier than blue. Blue is prettier than red. Red is prettier than green. You don't need to know anything about colors. You don't need to know anything to know that I just said something that is impossible. It is illogical. Now, somewhere along, you may not know exactly what I said was wrong, but you know that somewhere along the line, somewhere in my thought process, I've made a mistake because I made statements about values, and then I went back around and I contradicted one of my values, my supposed values. So I mean, at that point, why would you listen to me about colors? Why would you listen to me about any of those colors? When it comes to the topic of green, blue, and red, probably shouldn't take my advice, should you? No. And that's because of logic. That's the beauty of logic. It doesn't move. You don't have to be brilliant to figure this stuff out either. It's really not a matter of being brilliant. And sort of the mythological stories of Socrates, the trial of Socrates, when he gave his very long spiel, apparently. I'm not going to get to the historicity of whether or not Socrates was real or not, which is pretty interesting. But, as he said, he walked around the countryside for years upon end, all around Greece, and because other people had told him for so many years, like, Socrates, you're the smartest man alive. You know everything, because everything that people would bring up to him, he would be able to evaluate critically, and he could make sense out of things that other people just couldn't make sense of. Like these very seemingly complicated problems, he could he could figure out better than anyone else could. So, and despite this, Socrates knew deep down that he wasn't a particularly smart guy. There's lots of stuff he didn't understand, and he was surrounded by other people who understood things that he didn't. So he wanted to prove something. So he walked around the countryside and he looked for, you know, the smartest people he could possibly find all around Greece, and he found quite a few people who he thought at first, like, surely this person is far smarter than I am. And he would ask them questions, and he would kind of, you know, when he would get deep into conversations with them, you know, he would ask them questions, and he would find, like, really quick, like, it doesn't take long for even geniuses to expose how poor their logic is and how poor their reasoning is and how quickly they can succumb to biases, logical fallacies. And so he does this whole tour, and then he comes back to Athens, and you know, he then at that point he doesn't so much think that he's a genius. Like that's not the epitome. He still doesn't agree with what everyone else has been saying. Like everyone else has been telling him he's so smart, and basically his answer when he finishes his tour and he comes back to Greece is, I'm not smart. The rest of you guys are just fucking stupid. Like you guys completely lack this ability to reason through ideas. Like you guys are able to come up with these brilliant ideas on very specific areas, but when it comes to big monumental issues, just taking each thing one logical step at a time and not contradicting yourself, somewhere along the line most people just go way off the fucking rails, and then you can't get them back because then their psychology takes over, their biases kick in, and their ego just will not allow them to come back to that point that they were, to look at it and to just submit to logic. They refuse to do that. And this is why logic is so fucking important. This is why we have to understand this. Because if we're not going to be logical, if that's something that we don't care about, or it's something we don't even bother to care about trying to understand, if it's not something that as a society we're not worried about educating ourselves, our children, we're always going to be fucked. We're going to be in that same situation that Socrates complained about, supposedly complained about thousands of years ago. I mean, it was one thing when we did it back then, and the worst we could do was to do some slight pollution like metallurgy and shit, and we can cut down a forest with hand axes. We could kill people with swords and spears and shields, but we have nuclear weapons now. We are quickly destroying the planet. We are killing hundreds of billions of animals a year. We seriously need to tackle this issue of logic, and we need to understand. This isn't something that we have a whole lot of time left to fuck around with.